Welcome once again to Masterclass in Biology. We are continuing with MVQs and we will be doing MVQs on molecular basis of inheritance. This is very near the NEET entrance examination, again reinforcing the idea that most valuable questions are most valuable because they are most likely to appear in the NEET entrance examination. That will fetch you plus 4 marks per question. This is what I mean by most valuable. They are not very difficult, they are not out of the world. We know that the NEET entrance examination is primarily almost exclusively based on the text matter given in the NCERT. You have already read this chapter, you are fairly well prepared. This time what we are doing is that we are bringing to your notice the important points in the chapter that you should actually be very comfortable with. Now what this does is it gives you pointers that where you need to invest time, considering the fact that now only a limited amount of time is available till your entrance examination, and therefore you want to prioritize that what exactly are the actual areas where I need to invest time in. So this is the basic principle of doing MVQs right now at this juncture. It's a lengthy chapter, so I will be giving you some definitive statements here. So we will go to NCERT and I will recite some definitive statements to you, and these statements will be actually answers to the most common questions that are asked in the NEET entrance examination, and we will like to concise our discussion to a very short period of time, less than an hour. We want to do everything here. So this is chapter 6, this is molecular basis of inheritance. So the first question that comes to my mind would be directly here. So this is something very important. RNA is a very dynamic molecule. So think of RNA having multiple functions. It has messenger functions, it has an adapter function, it has a structural function, it has a regulatory function, it has catalytic function as well. So when you compare DNA with RNA is a very, very dynamic process. So this is the takeaway point from this paragraph that you are seeing here. Then obviously the structure of DNA, we have already done the structure of DNA in biomolecules. Let me revise something very important. So DNA would be a nucleic acid. This nucleic acid can also be called as a polynucleotide. It is a polymer. The monomeric unit are called as nucleotides. The nucleotides are made up of nucleosides and a phosphate group. A nucleoside is made up of pentose sugar and a nitrogenous base. The pentose sugar in DNA is 2'-deoxyribose, while in ribose while RNA it is actually the ribose sugar. This is a most important difference between DNA and RNA. The nitrogenous bases can be of two varieties. The double ring structure, they are called as heterocyclic nitrogen containing ring like structure. They are the nitrogenous base. One would be called as purines. They have double ring. Adenine and guanine are purine and are common to both DNA and RNA. While in pyrimidine, which are a single ring structure, thymine and cytosine are found in DNA, while cytosine and uracil instead of thymine are found in the RNA nucleotide. I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Now, the nitrogenous base binds to carbon number 1 and glycosidic linkage. The phosphate group binds to carbon number 5 of the pentose sugar through an ester linkage. A polynucleotide chain has a backbone made up of alternate sugar and phosphate moieties linked together by 3' to 5' phosphodiester bond. So please try to remember the direction of the phosphodiester bond, which is 3' to 5'. Deoxyribonucleoside triphosphates will be having two terminal for high energy phosphate bonds and two terminal high energy bonds between phosphate groups, and therefore can act both as substrate as well as the source of energy for polymerization reactions. So I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. And now we know about the 3' to 5' phosphodiester molecule, and in Erwin Chargaff told us that in a double-stranded DNA molecule, the number of purines will be equal to the number of pyrimidines, and therefore, and roughly the amount of adenine will be equal to the amount of thymine, and amount of guanine will be equal to the amount of cytosine. And Rosalind Franklin and Maurice Wilkins gave us the X-ray diffraction data, where they told the vital statistics about the basic dimensions of the DNA molecule. Based on all these information, Watson and Crick in 1953 gave what is called as the double helix model of DNA. So they agreed that it is actually helix, but they said that it has to be a double helix, and the two strands are joined to each other with the help of hydrogen bond between nitrogenous bases. The two strands are joined together with the help of nitrogenous bases, and this base pairing is actually complementary. Complementary does not mean identical. Adenine base pairs with thymine with 2 hydrogen bond, and guanine base pairs with cytosine with 3 hydrogen bond. The two strands are anti-parallel. The diameter is 2 nanometer. The pitch is 3.4 nanometer. There are 10 base pairs in B DNA, which is the most hydrated and most stable, and the distance between two base pairs is 0.34 nanometer, and the base pairs are stacked upon one another, and that gives an additional stability to the secondary structure of the DNA molecule. And the stacks actually rotate by 36 degree at each step of ascent, and this is something we know from class 11th NCERT as well. So if you look at your NCERT, this is a polynucleotide chain, and this is what we are saying, the various type of things. And then finally, what are the salient features of double helix model of DNA as given by Watson and Crick? And we have now just now discovered, we have now just discussed everything that is there. Now, this is the central dogma of molecular biology that tells you how the genetic information flows in a cell from the usual molecule that stores the genetic information to the expression of the gene, which is actually called as protein. So this is how the genetic information actually flows in the cell. Obviously, now we know that on the template of RNA you can synthesize DNA as well. This process is called as a reverse transcription, and the RNA molecules are also capable of replicating themselves. So this is the central dogma. It was given by Francis Crick. Now DNA can be pretty lengthy. So the genomic DNA, so that means in one set of chromosome, the length of the DNA can be around 1.1 meter, and in a diploid cell it can be 2.2 meter approximately. How do you condense this DNA? So you package it with the help of certain proteins, because DNA is acid and it is actually negatively charged. The proteins that are involved in packaging should be basic, and they are rich in basic amino acid, lysine and arginine, and they are positively charged. They are called as histones. The higher stages of condensation will also require non-histone proteins. So one organization of chromatin would be nucleosome, and this nucleosome is a 10 nanometer structure. A nucleosome has 200 base pairs, approximately 140 wrapped around the core particle and around 60 in the linker DNA. There are various type of histone proteins, and this is called as a bead on string structure. It can be further condensed, and the maximum condensation we already know will be achieved at the metaphase, where a 1400 nanometer structure is also formed. Now let me take this opportunity to tell you something. I am not talking about, say, for example, solenoid, filament, supercoiled filament, all these things, the non-histone proteins, the protein scaffold that are formed, because this is most valuable. This is based on NCERT, so we are sticking to NCERT. Just to give you an idea what we are doing in this video, this is bringing to your attention the information that is written in your NCERT and the other relevant parts. So now we know how this is actually done. Now this chromatin, if it is loosely packed, and therefore when you stain, it is lightly stained. This is called as euchromatin, where the genes are transcriptionally active, because for transcription to happen, there must be initiation of transcription. Listen to this answer. So for transcription to happen, there must be initiation of transcription, which means that the RNA polymerase must be able to access the promoter region in the transcription unit, and that is possible if it is uncoiled, it is loosely packed, then it is transcriptionally active. Transcriptionally inactive protein is called as heterochromatic, and therefore this is very tightly coiled and therefore darkly stained. The genes will be transcriptionally inactive. So again, you can understand, I am trying to tell you that gene, if it is active, it means it is being transcribed. If it is not active, it means it is not being transcribed. I hope this is absolutely clear. Now, the search for genetic material. So you have done a Frederick Griffith experiment hundreds of times. Let me give you what are the salient important thing that I want to bring to your notice. So Griffith was not trying to discover anything in genetics. He was trying to make a vaccine to prevent pneumonia, streptococcal pneumonia. And he discovered the process of bacterial transformation. It is one of the process by which the lateral gene transfer occurs in the bacteria, and the other two are transduction with the help of a virus and conjugation through the sex pili. So actually he discovered the process of bacterial transformation. He did not know what is the transforming principle. So keep it very simple. He was not trying to do anything in genetics. Actually, he was trying to discover a vaccine against pneumonia, and he incidentally, serendipitously, he actually discovered what is called as the transforming principle that actually transformed live R into live S, something from the heat killed S variety. And also please remember this fact that he came to know that this transformation is a permanent genetic change, and therefore when you are looking for the genetic material, the idea was that how do you identify the transforming principle? What exactly was the thing actually that actually transcribed live R into live S, and that will give you the molecule that stores the genetic information. Every McLeod and McCarthy proved it, that it has to be DNA. So they used enzymatic hydrolysis. You already know the technique. I am giving you the basic points, and they hydrolyzed all the biomolecules, and therefore they were first scientists to actually chemically isolate nucleic acids in the pure form, and then they were able to prove that it has to be DNA. So whenever DNA was present, transformation was occurring, and when DNA was used, transformation was not occurring. When DNA alone was used, transformation was also occurring. So that was a direct evidence that DNA has to be the genetic material, because we were not very comfortable about, we did not know actually the structure of the DNA molecule. Look at the time period 1933 to 1944. Watson and Crick model came in 1953. People were not very sure about the diversity in the DNA molecule, so they were very skeptical, and that is why your NCERT says that not all biologists were convinced, and therefore an unequivocal proof was actually given by Hershey and Chase. And Hershey and Chase used a bacteriophage. The question would be why bacteriophage? Because the confusion was between DNA and protein. Why there was confusion? Because protein could easily explain the diversity in the living world. And why bacteriophage? Because it is made up of only two things. It has a genetic material which is double-stranded DNA, and it has a capsid that is made up of protein, and they can be differently radioactively tagged proteins with the help of 35S and nucleic acids by 32P, and they infected the bacteria, and they found out that only the DNA during infection enters the bacteria, and some of the bacterial cell progeny also had so the radioactivity was found in the bacterial cell, not in the supernatant. And whenever they were using 32P, and therefore they came to the conclusion that it is only the DNA that enters the bacteria, and some of the new viral particles also had the radioactivity, and then they concluded that it has to be DNA, and this was the unequivocal proof that DNA is the genetic material. I hope this question is now absolutely clear. Now, this is a very important thing, properties of genetic material. So let me tell you right here that the first property is it should be able to generate a replica. If you look at the center dogma of molecular biology, DNA can. So DNA can make a replica, RNA can make a replica, but proteins cannot. So therefore, in the first point itself, you discard that protein cannot be the genetic material. This is very, very important. Then it should be chemically and structurally be stable. So DNA is double-stranded. So double-stranded will be there is a mechanism of repairing of DNA. So that means less likelihood that the daughter cells will actually inherit some damaged DNA. There is a scope of somehow repairing any damage that is actually repairable in the DNA molecule. Number 2, you remember 2' deoxyribose makes DNA less reactive. And again, thymine is actually 5-methyl uracil. So you can make certain components of DNA by chemical modification in RNA molecule, and therefore that also makes DNA more stable. And obviously DNA doesn't have a catalytic role, and RNA actually has a catabolic role, and therefore it takes a part in the metabolism of the cell and is likely to be more damaged. So now what we conclude is that DNA, because of these reasons, is actually more stable than RNA. So I am not saying that DNA is the genetic material, RNA is the genetic material. I already know that in certain viruses, RNA can be the genetic material. I am comparing the two types of genetic material, and what conclusion I have drawn is that DNA actually is structurally and chemically more stable than RNA. Then finally, it should provide the scope for slow changes. This is where again RNA is replicated at a very, very fast rate. RNA polymerase doesn't have a high fidelity. So DNA polymerase has proofreading function. It can take care of the problems that may be coming during the replication of the genetic material, and even then it can proofread and get them corrected very fast. In spite of this, some spontaneous mutations can occur in a rate of 1 in 10 to the power 6 or 10 to the power 7 basis that DNA polymerase is actually able to add during the synthesis of the new DNA molecule. This is what is called as the spontaneous mutation. But RNA, because it replicates very fast, and therefore there is lot of error in the RNA molecule, and therefore they mutate at a very fast rate. Now this is the problem with RNA viruses. They replicate very fast, and therefore they mutate very fast, and they evolve very fast. You can understand this is the problem we are facing with coronavirus as well. So if it infects the people, it multiplies in the people, and there would be a new variant because of the mutation that is likely to emerge, and that can actually not be amenable to any vaccination or treatment that we presently have for other strains, and that is the danger. And that is why we want to control the pandemic by making people immune, so that the virus, which is an obligate cellular endoparasite, doesn't find cell to multiply, and we know that it is going to evolve very, very fast. It should be able to express itself in the form of Mendelian characters. Those proteins are the Mendelian characters, and therefore you can understand that DNA cannot directly express itself in the form of Mendelian traits. Remember central dogma of molecular biology, but RNA can. So what is the conclusion? When we compare DNA and RNA on all the 4 times, what is the conclusion? We say that because DNA is chemically and structurally more stable, so we say that it is the preferred molecule for storage of the genetic information. For transmission or the flow of the genetic information in a cell, RNA is actually better. So this is what your NCERT concludes here. For the transmission of genetic information, the RNA is better. So we believe that it is probably the RNA word. So most of the scientists now are beginning to believe that the first genetic material of the life might have been RNA. So what are the reasons? RNA, on the template of RNA you can make DNA, and RNA has catalytic function as well. This is a very, very important thing to understand, that RNA can catalyze the thing. So therefore the first genetic material would have been RNA. Similarly, in class 11th you have read about viroid. That also tells you yes, that it can be an RNA word. Even if you have read the prokaryotic translation, the peptide bond formation is actually done by ribosome. The splicing is also possible with the help of spliceosome formation, which actually includes ribonucleoprotein. So there are so many pointers which tell us that after all it may be actually an RNA word. Now replication of DNA. The beauty of Watson and Crick model was that the model that they proposed, the complementary base pairing, immediately told them that how the DNA is going to replicate. So when the DNA replicates, the two strands will get separated. Both strands will act as template and they will be replicated in the entirety, keeping in the mind the two principles. One is the complementary base pairing and second is the anti-parallel nature. So anti-parallel means when read from the same side, one is 3' to 5', the other is 5' to 3'. And if this is happening, then the two daughter nuclei each will have an old strand and a new strand, an old strand and a new strand, and this type of replication would be called as semi-conservative. And it was proposed by Watson and Crick based on the complementary base pairing and anti-parallel nature that this should be the mechanism of replication of DNA. That is why their model, though very simple, and as I always say that simple is actually beautiful, was able to explain this very important thing, that how this genetic material is actually going to replicate. The experimental proof was given by Messelson and Stahl, and they actually used E. coli DNA and they used ammonium chloride. Why ammonia? They used cesium chloride. Make this correction. They use cesium chloride to make a density gradient and actually grew the bacteria in the heavier isotope of nitrogen, which is actually 15N. Please remember, your NCERT also says, please remember that it is not a radioactive isotope. It is actually a heavier isotope. And then they actually carried out the experiment. You don't know the experiment. The basic thing they will ask you will be that what possible theoretical mode of replication was ruled out after one round of replication. So after one round of replication, you knew that it cannot be conservative, but still there was a problem that it can be semi-conservative or disruptive. And then we are saying that what happens is that you do a second round of replication. Every time you are again using the normal isotope of nitrogen, you begin with 15N, and in this you will be actually proving that it is definitely semi-conservative. So therefore there are three theoretical methods by which DNA can replicate. Messelson and Stahl experiment is said to be an elegant experiment, because not only it proves that it actually replicates semi-conservatively, but disproves the other two theoretical mechanisms of possible DNA replication. I hope this is absolutely clear. The question is that beginning with 15N, there are 4 times that you actually allow the E. coli to replicate. So the number of progeny will be 2 raised to the power 4, and only 2 will be intermediate density, all other would be light. So this is the question that I am trying to bring to your notice. They can ask you that you are having a 15N, now you actually raise these bacterial colonies and provide them the unlimited resources. Every 20 minutes they are going to replicate. What happens after 4 rounds of application? So total number of progeny would be 2 raised to the power 4. Just try to remember and just try to logic and reason it out that only 2 will be intermediate, all will be light, all others will be light, and this will be based on the semi-conservative mode of DNA replication. So this is the question on Messelson and Stahl. And then about the actual process of DNA replication. So the actual process of DNA replication, just look at this very, very easily. See, the DNA is a highly coiled thing, and the two strands during DNA replication, both strands act as a template and are actually replicated along the entire length. Now this is something very important. So step number 1 would be that you actually uncoil the DNA and make a cut at ORI, and ORI would be AT rich. These are some definitive statements. Please try to remember what are these statements. I hope you know all of them very well. I am just bringing to your knowledge that in the first stage there would be cutting of the hydrogen bond along with the uncoiling of the DNA. This will be done by DNA helicase. This will lead to the formation of what is called as replication fork. This has to happen at a site which is called as ORI. Without ORI site, the DNA cannot replicate, and ORI is the requirement of a vector. If you want to clone a piece of DNA in recombinant DNA procedure, the vector has to provide an ORI. ORI, origin of replication, and we expect that ORI should be rich in A and T because it will be easier to separate, and this results in the formation of replication fork, step number 1. Then the strands which are partially separated from each other, they are stabilized by single strand binding proteins. Then comes the role of DNA dependent DNA polymerase. The problem with DNA dependent DNA polymerase is that it cannot initiate the synthesis, and DNA dependent DNA polymerase 3 is actually the main DNA synthesizing enzyme, and it cannot initiate, and actually it requires a 3' hydroxyl group to polymerize the thing, and therefore the formation of the new strand, the synthesis of the new strand by DNA dependent DNA polymerase actually is in the direction which is 5' to 3'. So it requires a primer. So there is a primer that is made by a special RNA polymerase, DNA dependent RNA polymerase, which is called as primase, and this primer is actually extended by the DNA dependent DNA polymerase because now it gets 3' hydroxyl group as free, and it can polymerize in 5' to 3' direction. This is according to the complementary base pairing and keeping the anti-parallel nature in mind. And one of the strand is the leading strand. This leading strand is replicated towards the replication fork. The other problem is because of this directionality problem, the other strand is called as lagging strand. It is replicated in short fragments. These fragments, they are called as Okazaki fragment. Each Okazaki fragment has a primer, a small primer at the beginning, and they are replicated away from the replication fork, and they can do actually proofreading function as well. And once they are replicated, the primers are removed and the spaces are filled with deoxyribonucleotides. This is generally done by DNA polymerase 1, and finally the ligase actually joins the fragments on the lagging strand, and this is how the DNA gets actually replicated. So leading and lagging strand are with respect to the new DNA molecules that are synthesized. So I hope this thing is absolutely clear. That is why your NCERT is saying that not only the DNA replication is semi-conservative, which is actually semi-discontinuous as well. So I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Incidentally, in prokaryotes, there is only one origin of replication, and the replication fork moves bidirectionally. In eukaryotes, they have pretty lengthy DNA molecules, and therefore there are multiple ori, and again the replication fork moves bidirectionally. Then this is transcription in central dogma of molecular biology. So synthesis of RNA on the template of DNA, and all three major cellular RNAs, the rRNA, mRNA, and the transfer RNA are transcribed on the template of DNA. But this time there is a problem. You have to define the boundaries, that which is the part of the DNA which actually has to be transcribed. So you need to have a definition of what is called as a transcription unit. You cannot transcribe both these strands because both strands of DNA are actually complementary, and complementary doesn't mean identical. This will complicate the genetic information because the two RNA molecules, they will be carrying different code, and number two, because they will be complementary, they can form a double-stranded RNA that fails to get translated. So this is the reason why only one of these strands would be called as the template strand and will actually be transcribed. And on this template strand, there needs to be a mechanism by which you are able to define the boundaries. So you have a transcription unit, the structural gene that actually will be transcribed, and before that there would be promoter, upstream, and literal. This is a literal mean. So transcription occurs upstream from promoter to the structural gene and downstream to the terminator. So these are the three components of the transcription unit. This is where the question can come, and then understand this very, very importantly. So this promoter is said to be upstream of the structural gene, but is 5' because the direction, the convention is with respect to the coding strand, and therefore this terminator is also 3', but it is actually located downstream. This is a convention that you have to follow. So structural gene is flanked by promoter and terminator. It is actually promoter that decides which is the template strand and which is the coding strand. The coding strand is actually displaced during the process of transcription. RNA polymerase nucleus itself is capable of opening up the helix in the region of the transcription unit. So coding strand is called as coding strand, though it does not code for anything, but what is being coded for resembles the coding strand. So whatever transcript is formed here will be similar to the coding strand, except obviously the thymine will be replaced by uracil, and this is the something which is most important. The most important thing in transcription is promoter. So transcription will be carried out by a DNA dependent RNA polymerase, and this promoter is actually vital. It is so vital that by switching its position, the definition of template strand and coding strand would be reversed. This may be promoter then this becomes the template strand, and this becomes the coding strand. This is something very important given in your NCERT here. And then we talk about the transcription. There are 3 steps: initiation, elongation, and termination. Termination you don't have to study. And think of the prokaryote transcription, very simple. The RNA polymerase has many subunits. One of the subunit is called as the sigma subunit, and this sigma subunit actually helps the prokaryotic RNA polymerase to identify the promoter, a particular sequence. Obviously promoter is a segment of DNA, so it will be made up of a sequence of deoxyribonucleotides. So what exactly is genetic code? It is actually a sequence of nucleotides that are present on DNA and correspondingly on the messenger RNA molecule that copies the DNA and actually carries the message to the apparatus, the protein synthesizing machinery that is located in the cytosol, namely the ribosome. So this is what exactly is happening here, and this is initiation with the help of initiation factor, termination with the help of termination factor. The core enzyme is capable of catalyzing only the elongation step, and they will ask you how do you actually explain this paradox. So we have done. So now we know that what is the core enzyme, what is the holoenzyme, what is the role of sigma subunit, and it is very simple. It binds to the promoter and moves along the template, and the downstream it goes towards the downstream terminator and transcribes everything. So the messenger RNA is transcribed in the direction of 5' to 3'. It will have a 5' end. It will have some UTR, the regions that are present between the promoter and the structural gene. They will also be present in the transcript, and they will not be translated. So they will be having leaders or 5' UTR, then the transcript of the structural gene, and then followed by the 3' UTR and the 3' end. And somehow the termination factor, which are row dependent or row independent factors, bring about the termination. Now, the genes involved in the same metabolic pathway in prokaryotes are located simultaneously on the template of DNA. This is the basic definition of operon, and the genes in the prokaryotes do not have introns, so they are already cistron, they are functional, so there is no post-transcriptional modification that is required in prokaryotes, and therefore the messenger RNA that can be formed in prokaryotes can be polycistronic. I hope this is now again absolutely clear. What about the eukaryotes? In eukaryotes, there are 3 different RNA polymerases. So unlike the RNA polymerase that you see in prokaryotes, here there are 3 different RNA polymerases, and they transcribe the different type of RNA molecules. And this is something you must remember, that RNA polymerase 1 actually transcribes what is called as the ribosomal RNA, and RNA polymerase 2 transcribe in prokaryotes the hnRNA. The hnRNA is heterogeneous nuclear RNA, that is the initial transcript form, and after post-transcriptional modification, it is converted into the messenger RNA molecule. So look at this. RNA polymerase 1 transcribes rRNAs and 28, 8S, you know that this S stands for Swedberg unit, then tRNA, and then look at this heterogeneous nuclear RNA polymerase 2. So this is a mistake sometimes student commit. Please try to remember that the final product is not initially formed. It is called as a heterogeneous nuclear RNA. This is complicated by the fact that there is no operon here, and they are split genes. That means there are some introns, non-coding sequences, and this hnRNA will contain the non-coding sequence sequence as well. Number two problem is that it has to be transported through the nuclear pore complex to the site of protein synthesis, which is actually ribosome in the cytosol. Now therefore you have to secure the two ends. So at 5' end there is capping, this is 7-methylguanosine. At 3' end there is tailing, which is called as poly A tail, and then the removal of the introns and joining together of exon. For God's sake, please do not only remove introns, join the exons as well and convert the thing into a cistron. The process is called as splicing. This happens in the eukaryotes, and this is with the help of ribonucleoproteins, small ribonucleoproteins, which are called as SNRPs, and then this transcript, which is different from hnRNA, is actually transported into the cytosol where they are getting translated. I hope this is now absolutely clear. Now, what about the genetic code? So this genetic code we can think about in the terms of the messenger RNA. I said that messenger RNA is actually a transcript of the template strand of the DNA. So the genetic code is a sequence of deoxyribonucleotide that is present on DNA, or a sequence of ribonucleotide that is present on the messenger RNA. We know that what are the properties of the genetic code. So there are some scientists, Georges Gamow actually told us that it has to be triplet. Hargobind Khurana was able to synthesize copolymers and homopolymers, and was able to artificially synthesize actually a gene, a very important scientist. And there was another scientist, Marshall Nirenberg. He was able to create a cell-free system. Severo-Ogawa enzyme, which is called as polynucleotide phosphorylase, can synthesize some oligonucleotides in a template independent manner. And all these things we were able to decipher the genetic code, and these are the properties of the genetic code. Is actually it is triplet. There are 64 possible combinations, 61 code for amino acid, 3 are stop codons. Now you know what are the stop codons. I am not going to waste time. AUG has dual role. Please try to remember. In prokaryotes it is formilated methionine. Genetic code is degenerate, which means that an amino acid can have actually more than one codon. Think of glycine, GGG, GGC, GGU, GGA, all code for glycine. On the other hand, it is non-ambiguous. So generally a codon will code for the same amino acid. So an amino acid can have more than one codon, but generally the codon will code for the same amino acid. It is read. When you read the template, you read the open reading frame. Generally you read it from 5' end to the 3' end, and you read it 3 bases at a time. You do not waste any bases. So it doesn't have any punctuation mark. It is comma-less. There is no overlapping, and it is read in a contiguous manner, and the genetic code is almost universal, and this is what is given in NCERT here. It will be very prudent if you actually invest some 15-20 minutes time here and see that the degeneracy of the genetic code is actually third code degeneracy. Look at the amino acids for which there is third code degeneracy, and you can remember a lot of them. So we know it is triplet, we know it is unambiguous, we know it is degenerate, there are no punctuation, it is read in a contiguous fashion, it is actually universal, and AUG has dual function, and now we exactly know what exactly it is now. So if you look at the open reading frame, then there is something which is called as a frame shift mutation. So if you insert or delete 1 or 2 base pairs in the open reading frame, then from the point of insertion or deletion, the open reading frame changes. This is what is called as frame shift mutation. But if you insert or delete 3, then the number of amino acids may actually change, but the open reading frame remains the same, and this becomes the biochemical basis of the proof that genetic code can be actually triplet. And please try to remember, suddenly I remember the name of Taylor and Vicia-Faba, where he actually proved that it has to be a semi-conservative replication with respect to chromosome. So Vicia-Faba, and the name of the name of the scientist who is Taylor. Now, because amino acids do not have the capability of reading the genetic code. Now please remember this, because the genetic code cannot be read uniquely by the amino acid, Francis Crick said that there has to be an adapter molecule. And this adapter molecule on the one hand will be able to read the genetic code, and on the other hand will be able to link it to amino acids. Something is required because amino acids cannot read it. So you require something in between. This is the adapter molecule. This was the hypothesis by Francis Crick. And at that time, actually, the transfer RNA that we know today was actually known as soluble RNA. It is one of the smallest. It is actually the smallest RNA molecule, but we did not know that it is the soluble RNA that is actually the adapter molecule. So the role of this molecule being an adapter molecule was identified later, and now it is actually called as transfer RNA. The two-dimensional structure is called as cloverleaf two-dimensional, and the three-dimension resembles actually an inverted L, English alphabet L. So it has a 5' end, it has a 3' end. The 3' end is actually the end where it actually accepts the amino acid. It has some unusual bases. The unusual bases can be dehydrouridine and as well as pseudouridine, and this at the opposite to the amino acceptor end there is a loop. This is anticodon, and it base pairs with the codon that is present on the messenger RNA. This base pairing will always be again complementary and anti-parallel. So please try to see this. Let me write something here. Let us say that the DNA is 3', 5', let us say TAC. So TAC. Now what would be the messenger RNA? So we know the messenger RNA would be 5' to 3'. What would be the codon that is present here? AUG. Now remember the initiator codon. What about the transfer RNA molecule? What will be the sequence in the anticodon? So again, you have to make it anti-parallel, and now try to understand. It will be very similar to this, and the thing would be only that thymine will be replaced by uracil. So this will be the sequence of the anticodon. So this can be pretty confusing in the entrance examination. So try to keep your cool. This actually is very simple. Whenever there is nucleic acid hybridization, try to see that there is always complementary base pairing, and the nature of hybridization is anti-parallel. The two strands are always anti-parallel to each other. Now we look at translation. So in translation, what is happening? There is a first phase of translation where the transfer RNA molecules are actually attached to their cognate, or the amino acids are attached to their cognate transfer RNA molecule at their 3' end, and this takes place with the help of a very important enzyme which is called as amino acyl tRNA synthetase. And in the presence of this enzyme, the amino acids are activated by their reaction with the ATP molecule, and then the charged and the activated amino acids are transferred to the 3' end. This is called as amino acylation of tRNA, or the charging of the tRNA, which is very important because when the peptide bond needs to be formed, the energy requirement is already completed because you have already provided the energy to the amino acid molecules. What requires is the presence of a catalyst, and that would be 23SR RNA, or the peptidyl transferase. So this is what NCERT is talking about. And then obviously there would be an initiation. So the messenger RNA molecule at its 5' end will bind to the smaller subunit of the ribosome. This is the beginning of the initiation. This happens in the formation of in the presence of initiation factor. It will require GTP molecule, and there would be two sites. One would be called as a peptidyl site, and this peptidyl site, there will be the initiator tRNA or the methionine tRNA that will come and bind. With the presence of the magnesium ion, the larger subunit comes and bind. The initiation factors are removed, and the elongation factors join the apparatus, and then the ribosome moves on the template of the messenger RNA, one codon at a time, and the A site is actually from an incoming transfer RNA molecule. The peptidyl transferase forms the peptide bond between the two amino acids, one at the peptidyl site, the other is at the amino acyl site, and then it moves. And then what happens is that the P site transfer RNA comes to the exterior side, the A site comes to the P site, and which was actually outside comes again to the A site, and this elongation actually continues till there is a stop codon. So how does the ribosome know that there is the messenger RNA. You remember that there was 5' and UTR, and then there was the transcript of the structural gene, and then there were 3' UTR as well, and there was a poly A tail. So how does the apparatus recognize from where to where it has to actually synthesize? So it will be from the initiator codon till a terminator codon. So there was a very important question in NEET entrance exam. So there are, let us say, 50 codons, and the 25th codon becomes a nonsense or a stop codon by a mutation. So we will get peptide of only 24 amino acid, because the second peptide will not be formed because there will be no initiator codon at the beginning. So this was the answer to the question in the AIIMS entrance examination. Now I hope you can understand. It moves like this, and when a stop codon comes at the A side, there will be no cognate tRNA, no corresponding cognate tRNA coming. Instead, a water molecule comes. This is a signal, and somehow, as I told you, that there is an end to translation. There can be polyribosome formation. We have already discussed that in Cell the Unit of Life. No point in revising here. I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. In bacteria, transcription and translation can be coupled because they are occurring in the same compartment. There is no post-transcriptional modification that needs to be done, and the RNA molecule is transcribed and translated from the same end, namely the 5' end. And therefore this is an important question. Now we know. Now look at this chapter, the information given in this chapter. So we have a gene located on DNA. A segment of DNA gets transcribed, let us say, into mRNA, and this is translated into protein, and this is what is called as the gene expression. Now we want to regulate the gene expression. Sometimes you need to make protein, sometimes you don't need to make protein, sometimes you need to make large number of proteins, sometimes you need to make a small amount of protein. So how do you actually achieve it? Now what happens is that this is given in your NCERT, that gene expression is almost exclusively regulated in prokaryotes at the level of initiation of transcription. So remember, initiation of transcription is binding of RNA polymerase to the promoter, So either you allow it bind and move along the template, or you do not allow, and therefore transcription may or may not take place. And this is how you regulate the gene expression. And remember the basic concept of operon that I told you, that the genes located in the same metabolic pathway are located simultaneously on the template of DNA, and they share a common promoter. So if you now remember the LAC operon, which you must have done very frequently, so you know that there are actually 3 genes. Can you see they are located simultaneously on the template of DNA, and they share a common promoter. There is another region in between which is called as the operator, and then there is the regulatory gene, and the regulatory gene has its own promoter. If you remember, this would be the template of the DNA molecule. Now we know that what is LAC Z, LAC Y, LAC A. Why is it so? So this is the operon concept. Please remember, they are located simultaneously on the template of DNA, and they share a common promoter. So what are the questions that are likely to ask? What is LAC operon? What does LAC stand for? The answer is lactose. Is it an inducible operon? What type of operon is called as an inducible operon, where it is transcribed in the presence of the substrate? This type of operon is actually called as inducible operon. What is the inducer of LAC operon? The answer is lactose, sometimes an isomer which is actually called as allolactose. What is the enzyme coded for by LAC Z? The answer is beta galactosidase. What are the functions of beta galactosidase? The major function is that it actually metabolizes lactose and converts some amount of lactose into allolactose. What is the function of LAC Y? It produces an enzyme which is called as permease, and because of this permease, the lactose is able to enter the cell. What about LAC A? Transacetylase. And at the level of 12th and NEET entrance examination, we are not absolutely sure about the function, and this is how is it actually regulated. So the regulated thing is that the regulatory gene constitutionally constitutively produces a protein. This protein is called as repressor, and when the lactose is not present, the repressor actually goes and binds to the operator and blocks the thing, and therefore RNA polymerase will not be able to move along the template and will fall off, and the LAC operon will not be transcribed. So I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Okay, let me make this thing for you. This is a question that they can actually ask. So let us try. Somehow. Give me a minute. So we are saying that we are making the LAC operon structure. So this is ZYA. We have already discussed what is happening here, and this is the promoter. This region will be called as the operator. This is LAC I, and this LAC I has a promoter here. It produces what is called as repressor. So when the lactose is not present, this repressor actually binds to operator and blocks the thing, and therefore the RNA polymerase is not able to move along and transcribe the operon, and transcription does not take place. Now I hope this is absolutely clear, but please remember this repressor is a protein, and one of the protein will actually somehow it will be lost, obviously, because it has a half-life. So the older one will be removed and a newer one will actually come and bind. In between these two things, the RNA polymerase actually can get an opportunity to transcribe the operon. So whether lactose is present or not, in the parenthesis your NCERT says a low level of expression of LAC operon has to be present, otherwise how lactose is going to enter into the cell. Now we can explain why is it so, and what happens when lactose is present. So because of the presence of that permease, the lactose enters into the cell, binds to the repressor, inactivates the repressor. The repressor cannot bind to operator. The RNA polymerase will be able to move along the template of the DNA and transcribe the LAC operon. And this is how it is actually called as a negative inducible because it is induced by the substrate, which is lactose itself. And why it is called as a negative control, because whenever this is the regulatory gene, whenever the product of this regulatory gene is able to function, transcription does not occur, and if it is not able to function, actually transcription occurs. Now please remember that metabolism of lactose will actually produce glucose. So remember, lactose is actually a disaccharide, and when the lactose molecule is broken down again, you will get glucose molecule, which is the preferred source of energy of the E. coli. So this is how it is under a positive regulation as well, but your NCERT says that it is beyond the discussion at this level. So what we are going to do is that we are going to stop here, because the DNA fingerprinting and human genome sequencing, it is my firm belief that should be taught after discussing the biotechnology. You need to know how to actually cut DNA molecules. So you should have the knowledge about the working of the restriction endonucleases, the gel electrophoresis, etc. All these things we must be comfortable, and then we will talk about it. So the last two sections of this chapter, the DNA fingerprinting and the human genome sequencing, the MVQs, I will discuss them when I will discuss biotechnology, after discussing the basic tools and principles of biotechnology. Hope this helps. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.